do not know whether the gods are faces that we give to that which is faceless in order to comprehend it and be close to it as human beings. If they are manifestations of distinct powers arising from an unknowable immensity or supreme reality or a oneness. If they are mediators or messengers between us and the God who is beyond comprehension. If they are aspects of nature and the world personified. If they are archetypes or forces of consciousness both within and without man. Or if they are at the highest human expression of being beyond mortality. Perhaps they are a combination of all of the above. What I do know is that the gods are mysteries, and that we as human beings are ultimately drawn to them. And I know that they respond if one calls out to them. In times when the shrouds between worlds are temporarily unveiled, when our universe expands, they make themselves manifest. For this to happen, one has to live poetically and live strongly. One has to live a life of great deeds, of overcoming, a life worthy of divine attention. One has to boldly face great sorrow and greater joy, for the gods have no interest in dull normalcy. Infinite divinities await, hidden within man himself, which is always the place of the final pilgrimage. The godlight becomes living reality when dreams intersect with the waking world. These are knife-edge moments when the mythic cuts through the temporal to reveal the timeless, where the spirit is elevated to its superior states, where the poetic takes flight over the rational. In moments such as these, the gods awaken and reclaim their seat in the soul. We can hear them when we call out for them, in the crash of thunder and in the whisper of rustling leaves, in the creak of frosted towering evergreens and in the roar of waves, in the solemn song of eternal dawn and in the ecstatic cries of battle and love. And we wait for the furor of their return. Burn, baby, burn. The gods are coming.
Free your mind.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. You just heard my favorite description of the gods that I have ever read from our guest from his other excellent book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga. And to me, it's always stirring and it hits it on the nail. And the bottom line, we can discuss the gods, but we can't live a life of normalcy. We have to be bold to get through those portals to lift the veil. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope YouTube doesn't strike it out as it often did, especially when we get close to the truth, but we shall see. My name is Miguel Connor. I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, and I welcome you on this day of Mercury. Good to see people always already in the chat, like Christina, H.P. Lovecraft, Benjamin, and others. And today I am very excited to have for a sequel, the amazing Aki Cederberg, this time to discuss his book, Holy Europe. Where's that camera? There you go. Aki, thank you very much for coming back on the show.
Thank you, Miguel. Great being here. And that is a beautiful reading you do there of that passage.
Oh, well, thank you. Again, it's a wonderful book, just like Holy Europe. Your writing is amazing, and I can tell you are there, you're experiencing these things, and you really translate them well. So it will be a great book to cover, like your last book. And with us, too, we got Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing? Are you meeting the gods?
As often as they will let me. You know, I try not to bug them too much. If you bug them too much, you don't like the outcome. At least I don't.
Yeah, well,
I'm looking. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have found the enemy, and the enemy is often us. So that's always the danger. Yeah, they're going to change your life forever. They're going to throw everything upside down, and your old self will die, and your relationships will end, and you will be in the middle of a new labyrinth. But at least it's a more real labyrinth. So it is. Anyway, for those of you on the chat, please, if you have any questions for Aki or complaints against Graham and I, please super chat them so we can separate them. We already got a good crowd, already over more 50 this early on. And again, it should be a good one. So Aki, tell us for starters, why did you write Holy Europe? Excuse me. What made you write Holy Europe?
So yes, some people may remember I was on your show earlier, and I kind of told my sort of origin story, what resulted in me writing the first book, which was Journeys in the Kali Yuga, which is about me delving into the Indian esoteric, or a branch of the Indian esoteric tradition, which was basically because I was homesick. I was looking for a sense of home or a deeper connection, and I found that in my own homeland and in Europe, in a broader sense, that connection was missing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of paganism in Europe, but a lot of it is resting on very sort of elusive foundations, and it's in ways a broken tradition because the living lines of authority are missing. So I wanted to see a similar path, a similar religion in a way. Through my experience of India. And India in many ways is similar to European paganism. The most similar, I think, of the world religions that exist today. It is polytheism in a way, and has this sort of broad church, so to speak, approach to the divine. And that my first book details my sort of decade of delving into the Indian tradition, at the end of which I discovered that it's really, you cannot go into another cultural tradition like that without, in a sense, cutting ties with your own native tradition, your own home, and your own family in a way. You have to completely sort of cut ties with that and enter into a new world. And that wasn't really my destiny, my dharma, so to speak. It wasn't the path that I was supposed to take. And I don't think it's a path that is open for most Westerners. There are exceptions, but most Westerners, I think, would have a hard time going down that path. Of course, I speak specifically of the path that I went down, which is the Naga Babas, the Naga Sadhus, and the Juna Akara, into which I received an initiation. But after having delved into this Indian tradition, it gave me a mirror by which to look at my own culture and my own landscape in a more clear, perhaps, way. And so this is kind of a continuation, Holy Europe, of this seeking of this elusive spiritual center of Europe. What is it, and how do we approach it in the modern time? What do ancient gods mean to modern people? Do they have any relevance? How do we approach them? Do they talk back? What is this? What is missing? And so, Whole Europe then is this kind of exploration of this elusive spiritual center of Europe. And I use this on the cover of the book. You have an image of a manifestation of the world tree. Now, this happens to be a mountaintop in Germany where they have this tradition of a sort of axis mundi, a tree of the world that is raised, and the wreath is replaced every year in this spring ceremony. And so that's why that's on the cover there. And I explore sort of 9 branches of the European world tree. And on the cover of the book, as you were showing, there is it is a cross-like figure, but it's also a sun wheel.
Yeah.
So it sort of combines aspects of paganism and Christianity, and sort of is a synthesis of those two things in a way. And paganism and Christianity really are the two major streams which, um, on the tension of which the whole of Europe is based. I mean, the whole of Europe and European history and religion really comes down to these two streams of paganism, pre-Christian polytheism, and then the later Christian religion, which of course adopted many aspects of paganism into itself. And so this is my sort of time-bound exploration of these topics in this time. I'm not pretending to be in some other place, and so I'm exploring also like contemporary Europe and what these sacred sites look like today, and how can we approach them, and what are the difficulties we face when approaching them, and also what is the relevance of all these things. So that is it really in a nutshell. The holy really is the sort of mythic transcendent center, or the symbolic story upon which our whole culture is based. And sacred sites, holy sites, are those places, not arbitrary places, but those places in which the holy makes itself manifest to us, and in which we can experience the holy, because that is the central thing. We need to be able to experience and access this dimension. And that's why I'm approaching it as a sort of, in a way, my personal travelogue, where I go to these places and I seek these things, and then I try to be honest about what I find, because you don't always find what you want, and you don't always access. Like, it's not easy. So this is what I try to do. I try to find these elusive gods, as you played in the clip in the beginning. For myself, of course, primarily, and then as a writer, I try to communicate my experience to others, and hopefully that will give something to them as well.
No, it's a wonderful book, and for the audience, he goes to so many places. Obviously, Finland, Sweden, Germany, France, Spain. We'll talk about Portugal, Italy, and so many pictures of these sites, these portals, and the things you saw. It's very evocative and engaging, and I think it's important too, Aki, what you're doing, because uh, obviously we finally are out of a time where we have to worry about the Abrahamic religions suppressing and not allowing us to the materials or connecting, excuse me, to these old spirits. But as you say, suddenly, okay, now we have the opportunity, and people in Europe seem to be like shrugging their shoulders, or they're guilty or whatever, to these ancient myths and cultures, which are essential for the very survival of the continent. I mean, it's true. I mean, it's a fact. I mean, and I was thinking, if I were to move to China, Peru, or France, doesn't matter, I would want to look at the mythology, the religion, the sites, so I could understand the people and get my psyche aligned with the people. So nothing to do with immigration, or it's where you are in the land, you have to honor the land, right? And you yourself, you got some blowback from this book when you published it first in Finnish, right?
Well, I mean, a surprisingly very minor blowback.
Oh, okay.
It was mostly very well received. I was actually surprised by,
Good.
the major newspapers wrote about it, mostly in very positive ways, and people were very excited about this book. And whatever criticism came towards it came from very sort of, marginal voices on the internet, which isn't really doesn't bother
Just
me.
trolls, yeah, typical
Yeah,
trolls.
yeah, and a sort of also like a sort of resentment. Nietzsche talks about this kind of grudge, this kind of a hatred of whatever is beautiful and noble, because people aren't able to um, hold those ideals themselves, so they hate anything that sort of doesn't present itself in this sort of apologizing way. And, of course, that's just I'm not. I try to be honest, and I think you have to be strong about these things. You can't be like, "Well, I'm sorry, I think this way," and present these. But I think about what you said earlier. I think there's this old thing about the shaman, how he goes and recovers a lost part of a person's soul. There's this idea that a person can lose a part of their soul or spirit, and it can become trapped in the underworld or something like that. And the shaman is there to rediscover that soul and bring it back. So there's this kind of soul loss that is talked about in a lot of these native traditions. And I think this can be extended to collectives as well. And I think on some strange level, Europeans have collectively lost a part of their soul.
Right.
And I don't think it's anybody else's fault necessarily. I think it's a unique situation of European people where they've lost touch with their spiritual homeland, their roots, their sense of self, and their sort of their connection with the transcendent or with the divine. And I think it might have something to do with the very external approach that Europeans have had to the world. The Oswald Spengler, the cultural historian, who speaks of this sort of Faustian soul, of how Europeans are this, or he talks of Western people are sort of outward oriented. Everything is about conquering space, conquering the sea, climbing the mountain, going where no one has gone before, like in Star Trek, I guess. Or this whole idea of like going further, going farther, and all of the architecture, beginning from the Viking ships to the Gothic cathedrals to the spaceships, is this like external projection of the spirit or the soul. But I think maybe in the process of this Faustian impulse, Westerners or Europeans have lost touch with their inner impulse or some part of their soul, because I find it a very unique situation that Europeans are sort of experiencing on a collective level. And if I can in any way, in any meager way, help point to some kind of land or some sort of sense of rootedness and groundedness that can have help people discover something that has been lost, I think I would be very happy about that.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right about the Oswald Spengler, because the Faustians, like you said, we call them colonizers. We got to expand and take the research. We'll make a deal with the devil now and pay for it later. And it has been a blowback, and it just doesn't include Europeans. I think he talks like year 1000. So you have to include the Mongols and other groups that just decided we are going to go on this colonizing, conquering, because as Spengler says, the Greeks and the Romans, they had empires, but they were very limited in size. They weren't that big as we want to think. Even Alexander the Great, and they had a certain connection. What they conquered, they connected with the land. They honored the gods. They honored the culture. It was, like you said, very different. And it's time to move on and, address, people can address their shadow. Americans need to address their shadow while still honoring the land. Now, a point I wanted to bring too, which I saw another commonality in your book, is the idea of Hermes. And we can say Hermes or Dionysus, because obviously with the Orphics, who were so huge, they're really so important to the culture, to the Western culture. Dionysus and Hermes are kind of the same, right? They're gods of the people. They're gods of nature. They're gods that help the middle and lower classes. They don't see differences, and they reward people. They're gods of the land, but they're also psychopomps they're like gods of the shamans, right? And we see that. Maybe give us some examples in Western Europe. Obviously, the Romans had no problem saying that Odin and those gods were Mercury. They associated them with Mercury. And as you see, there's a lot of this proto-Hermeticism in Western Europe, even in the Scandinavia, right?
Well, it's a very, very complex question. Yes, and I agree. There are similarities with Odin and Hermes as this sort of traveler between worlds that relays information or knowledge or wisdom, from other spheres to people.
Right.
There are people who say that Odin might be some sort of later addition to the Nordic pantheon. Even I've heard this. I have no idea if this is true or not. But I'm there are overriding similarities between European peoples in their divinities and in the way that they approach the divine. There is very often an idea of a sky father or a thunderer and a thunderer, and there's deities that travel between these worlds, and then there's this sense of a sacred mother of earth, and their relationship creates all life. And I mean, this is just to give some examples, but obvious examples. But I find that there's a lot of shared ground between the European pantheons, and Europeans have a tendency to sort of emphasize their differences, whereas I have been trying in this book to find the commonalities, the common. What is the common sort of? What are the common spiritual aspects that are common through the European cultures? What are these things that tie us together? And I think there are clearly threads that you can find, such as the nature of the divine, how to approach it, the idea of sacred time and the cyclical view of the world, and the idea of man and man's place in the universe and what his role should be. And I think, regional differences, languages, ethnic cultures, these are all real things, but there is also a sort of kindred spiritedness or a commonality between these European pantheons. I don't know if you had any question or I answered any question you were giving me.
No, that's it. Maybe, the commonalities. And again, I think again, Dionysus, it's not just, he's not the god of the wine. What he represents really, and you show in your work, really manifests in other cultures from Scandinavia to Western Europe. And of course, Hermes, what he represents, like you said, the shaman, the psychopomp, the bringer of gifts, often the trickster, and he appears as Odin, and he appears in many Western European spirits and gods. So there is these commonalities, and it really shows a beauty that regardless of continent, there can be one spirit, one people, one, as you said, one looking for the divine, one path that we can take to look for the divine. And it brings unity, I think, when we see these things, and lifts up the mystery that is happening in the land and gets us connected to the land. Ultimately, that's what Dionysus and Hermes would want us, get connected to the land, because that is a spiritual place and it has so many portals. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, and I would also say Apollo. Then, if we want to go the
Sure.
Greco-Roman route, I mean, I think you have to have both. You have to have the sort of light and order and clarity and sort of whatever Apollo represents. Although Apollo, funnily enough, is also a god of poetry and music, and has some similarities to Dionysus. But we need both the deities of sky and of earth, not just one or the other. And there tends to be, an overemphasis with people on one or the other sort of aspect. But I think a central quality to European paganism is this idea of a balance of light and dark forces, of the male and the female, or the masculine and the feminine things, the sort of masculine and feminine divine features of the universe, or of God. And I think we should revere both of these things.
Oh yeah, for sure. And for the audience, you also did some of the rituals. One that stuck out to me, you did a ritual for the Germanic goddess Ostara. I think you were in Sweden at the time. Was that the one of the most your favorite ones, or maybe tell the audience some of the your rituals that really stuck out to you that you remember?
Well, I mean, what is ritual? Ritual is action on a mythic level.
Right.
And of course, me being from Finland and having ancestry in Scandinavia and the North in general, my path is of the North. That's my sort of spiritual homeland in a broader sense. I mean, what is the North? The North is the direction of danger, of mystery, of Hyperborea, of light, the kingdom of Apollo they spoke of.
Yeah.
It is a bunch of these things. It is kind of represents this ideal that's both a paradise and a dangerous, perhaps mirage even. So I have a very sort of northern spiritual attitude just based on my cultural background. And however, I mean, my strongest connection still is to my own Finnic tradition. And with writing these books, I have also started doing more rituals and upholding things of the Finnic tradition, because I think that's an aspect that's often overlooked and not practiced. And so I'm trying in my own way to do ritual work, which is done, I mean, in this context, if we speak of rituals in sort of in any kind of semi-public way, they are done to maintain the cosmic order and balance. They're done to sort of uphold the center. And this is done via the celebration of these cyclical festivities, cyclical rites, calendar rites, as well as rites of passage. So coming into being, unity, and passing into new being. So birth, marriage, union, and death, passing into new being. So when we go through life, we have to go through these portals to make our life meaningful and have a sense of meaningful structure. And that's what these rites of passage are there for. They're there to sort of structure and anchor us into the eternal. Just as much as these calendar rites and cyclical time is there to anchor us into whatever is beyond time. So we have these points in time that sort of anchor us to whatever is beyond it. A sacred time, sacred reality, so that when we go about our life, we have these moments when we connect to something that is higher. And this is in every day of our life, moves in a cycle. We wake up in the morning, the sun hits its apex, and then it starts receding, goes into the underworld, and next day it's born again. And all of human life and all of life really on this planet goes according to this cyclical, seasonal way. So this is really the sense of ritual. Now, I can't really then there are, of course, personal rituals that one does for personal connection, development, and various reasons. And it's hard to say, what was my favorite ritual, but I feel very blessed to have been
Yeah.
part of many ritual fires where I felt that the fire has been mirroring my own fire. And of course, these are points of convergence where the sun and the moon are sort of simultaneously in the sky, and everything is happening at once. And you have sort of these short moments of experiencing the simultaneousness of everything. You can see the past, the present, and the future, and glimpses of these things. And this is what I've experienced, and I tell of some of these things in the book. Sometimes they would surprise me in their magnificence and power, and sometimes the gods are mute, and that's the nature. It's not always, there's people who are in touch with various entities all the time, and I'm certainly not one of those people. Although I have been oriented towards these elusive gods my whole life, but I'm not claiming to be a psychic or have some sort of hotline to the divine. So I value those rare moments in which I actually feel that, okay, there's something is speaking to me, the universe is communicating. And that's not every day, and that's not easy, but it's certainly important and real. And it's a very real human experience that I think has guided most of our culture in a way.
Really well said. And as you were saying, we go back to Hermes, as above, so below. The ancients weren't just subservient to the gods. Like you're saying, our rituals, our reenacting the myth, what we do down in here actually helps the universe stay on course in harmony. As the Jewish saying goes, the God needs us as much as we need him. It's a team. It's a spectrum where it's not, oh, please help me and don't throw thunder at me. It was more nuanced with these ancients. And again, they were more connected to the world and the universe and the numinous, as Jung would call it. So there is one passage I want to read before we get into what a lot of people here want to hear about your visit to Cathar land, to Languedoc. But let me read this paragraph from your book. As you were going through France, I believe, you write, "These deeply rooted pagan folk traditions do not correspond to our modern image of a harmless nature religion in which man lives in harmony with a perpetually smiling Mother Earth. For our pre-modern ancestor, nature was not just the womb from which all life springs, but also the tomb in which it inevitably ends. Sexuality begins what death completes, binding those two primal powers together. Darkness is Darkness is as present as light, and destruction follows creation. The eternal dance and counterbalance of these forces form the cycle of life, such as our ancestors knew it. Later, with the advent of the religions of the city, primarily Christianity, the old gods and the elemental forces of nature had to retreat in the wake of a new god. The practitioners of the old ways were called pagans, meaning country dwellers or villagers. Their life and work were tied to the land and soil." So I think that describes more or less what you were experiencing and seeing behind the scenes and in another time.
Yes.
Yeah, for the audience, there are many passages. He's not just describing, oh, I went today and I saw, a sculpture of Ukko, the Finnish, you're actually trying to feel the land, right? Feel the history, talk to people and see what this folk traditions are telling you, right, Aki?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in that passage I was also criticizing the way that urban pagans sort of revere nature, or they talk about nature as if it's this like benevolent mother only. And I mean, this is not how people in the past have experienced nature. At least in places where you had to struggle with food and cold and things, it's not uh, it is not like that. And I think it would be important that people get a little bit more realistic about what nature actually is and what that means. I mean, of course, we should revere nature and respect it, but the ancient people were not tree huggers like today. They have a very safe and cushy existence, and on their spare time they can go to a park and hug tree. It wasn't like that. Their literal life and death was tied to the land in a different way. And so I think you have to sort of appreciate and understand and accept also these sort of harsh realities of nature. It's not all joyous and beautiful. It's also cruel and fairly indifferent to various living creatures.
Very true. What most people think of nature is not nature. We've tamed nature. We've shackled Gaia and created situations where we're safer to survive. But true nature is, very complex. So I'd like to bring in Graham. Graham, any questions or comments so far?
No, I've been very much enjoying it. The one thing that jumped out to me was in the Norse pantheon, one of the biggest parallels to Hermes that I've always noticed is Loki. He seemed very much like a Hermes type character, where so much of what the gods have, their great gifts, their magic items and all, they were a result of, Loki, over betting his abilities and then having to make good on him overstretching himself. And I was curious if he also saw any the parallels there as well. Tag.
Well, I think there's these are, of course, it's kind of apples and oranges sometimes with trying to put compare the Greco-Roman gods to the Nordic gods, for instance. It doesn't directly translate, and I'm not saying that they, in my view, are necessarily the same. There's a weird tendency, and this is maybe a little bit off topic, but has been a tendency, to worship Loki, for instance, in some circles, and this really has no historical precedent at all. There is no evidence of Loki ever being revered as a god, and or any really of the children of Loki, or any of these sort of chaotic deities, because these were the enemies of man. They were the enemies of the gods and the enemies of order. And it's true that Loki is a catalyst of change in the Eddas, the later collections of these myths. He's the one that always challenges the gods and pulls tricks on them and gets things going. He's the agent of change. But ultimately, he's also the agent of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods.
Right.
Ultimately, he becomes chaos, all devouring chaos, and his children are Fenrir, the wolf, and Jormungandr, the great world serpent, and Surt, the fire demon, and so forth. I mean, these are that clash with the gods of order at the end of time. So I think I'm not sure about the Hermes. I understand that there's similarities, but I'm not sure that they're quite the same. I think maybe, even though Loki is mercurial, I wouldn't say he's Mercury.
Yeah, and
Oh,
I
I
believe
agree.
he's not. He's not even in Germanic and Central. It's only in Scandinavia. So somehow he got imported or appeared. You know what I mean? He's again. I would put Odin closer to Hermes than I would Loki. Although Loki, yes, Loki is a trickster without a doubt. Were you going to say something, Graham?
Yeah, no, I was going to agree 100%, and I appreciate him bringing up about how there were no organized worship of Loki, no temples or anything. And I agreed 100%. Is I was just bringing up Loki as a counterpart because, in a large extent, it's almost like Loki got half of Hermes and Odin got the other half. It's like their portfolios split the responsibilities between Odin and Loki that Hermes had. Tag.
Yeah.
Well, there is hints in the myths of them being blood brothers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, don't let Marvel fool you. He's not Thor's brother. He's Odin's brother. And they could be a shadow thing, a yin and yang. So theologically, it's very smart how to parse these out. And the adventures of Thor and Loki are hilarious when they cross dress and they go to weddings, and it's like something out of like a buddy cop movie in Hollywood. So I guess Marvel kind of got that right. But
Well,
so awesome.
there has been a very strong resurgence in the Norse myths, particularly in recent years. Probably because of all the TV series, the Vikings, and
Right.
countless movies, and the whole genres of music and video games and this and that. I mean, and Marvel, of course, and stuff. So I mean, it is really like these things are still a very important part of our culture.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, from an archetypal point of view, I mean, again, look at World War II and Jung talking about Wotan and, the archetype of war. And of course, these things are manifesting, and our myths and our religious can help us with our collective psychology, whether it's the United States, Central America, Europe, we can find a lot of insight. So, but I want to move now to France, to southern France. Tell us about your adventure there and what you found. Was that your first time in Languedoc and those areas, or?
Yes, I mean, I had that was my first time in the Languedoc area, yes, that I write about in the book. And it is a strange thing with that area, because it is, it's an area immersed, the Pyrenees, the Pyrenees, the mountains of the Pyrenees. It's a really magical area, the south of France especially, and it is sort of remote from the rest of the world. It is this little pocket of magic in Central Europe that doesn't kind of feel like it truly is part of the modern world in all ways. There's like, it's remote, it's quiet, there's not that many people, the Wi-Fi doesn't work that well. You can walk a whole day without seeing anybody.
Wow.
And it is really a strange magical area. And then, of course, it has countless layers of history. And so there are sacred sites upon sacred sites upon sacred sites from different eras. There are holy sites belonging to several different traditions and timelines all at once. There are specific places, pinpoints, that then combine with more contemporary, entire sort of subgenres of literature and modern mythology. And so I sort of approached these things and went to many of these places which had interested me for a long time, and which tie into other things I write about earlier in the book, specifically about Germany. And so it was great to experience some of these things. And of course, you find a lot of wisdom and a lot of folly. You find a lot of things which truly are very powerful and moving, just the real history of places and the things that have taken place in that area, like the Albigensian Crusade, the sort of first modern genocide, it is called, where a bunch of people, Christians, Cathars, pagans, just so many people were slaughtered because of this sort of rivalry and Catholic, sort of a rivalry between Catholicism and then Catharism, which was a kind of different version of Christianity. So, you find remnants of these things when you go there, and some of these things, like Montsegur, are very moving and very powerful places still today. And it is one of the places that I have since returned to, and that I feel strangely at home in. Maybe it's because I'm a weird person and I feel at home when I'm a little bit in a special place. But there's something sort of comforting about being outside of the modern world. You feel a little safe. You feel somehow like you're out of reach of the tentacles of the negative aspects of the modern world in some sense.
Yeah,
And so I write about this in this chapter called Heresy of the book, and I also explore the role of Christianity, Catharism, and the esoteric forms of Christianity that seep into these various places, and also artists' shrines and art and culture of France, not just southern France, but also northern France. So it's a strange. I have conflicted views, sort of a paradoxical view to it, because on the one hand, I do find that there's a lot of tomfoolery, should we say, happening in that area. You go to, there's places in the Languedoc where you go to a village shop window, like a bread shop, a grocery store, and there's like a UFO with a shovel and crystals and Rennes le Chateau guidebooks and like magnets to find treasures and Alf smoking weed, like, and it's just like the most ridiculous, weird, things. And you're like, this is where people buy their bread and butter, for the day. So it's and then you feel, this is quite strange, and there's obviously something very strange happening bringing all these people into these places. But I mean, this is one of the things I explore in this book is what is it that brings people into these things? What is it about these places, these sites? It's not just the history. What is it about the nature of these locations that pulls people toward them? And that's really a question I try to explore in this book. The Romans had this concept of genius loci, the spirit of the place, that there is a sort of living spirit that inhabits a certain place. Not every place is the same as every other place. There are different places with different personalities and different natures. And I think southern France and the Pyrenees is certainly a place of high magic and power in various forms. And I have since been there, as I said, again, and I write about it also in my next book, which I'm working on now. And I'll probably return because I do find it to be a high power place.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of it might be, as we've discussed on the show, there are places that have portals. And again, I think southern France had some ancient portals. Of course, René Le Chateau might have portals. Certainly, Portugal has been known, and I've had Patrice Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin's granddaughter, who did these treks, and she found these portals, and people are still doing these rituals. Again, for some reason, the Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean, and she even talked somebody who you mentioned in your book, Jean Cocteau. She said he was part of a secret society who was guarding these portals and doing these rituals. Obviously, Cocteau was very much into the occult, but I think there's something to it. And I think that's whether it's like you write, Lucifer lost his gem and it fell down and created a portal, the Holy Grail, but there is something about there. And I give the example, Aki, another place you went to, Sintra, which we can talk about. We were driving down from Sintra and we were there's the ocean and it's like this steep. And my uncle goes, "Oh, here's a portal." And we're driving with his kids. And what do you mean by a portal? He stops the car in the highway and the car starts going upward up the road. And I'm freaking out. He says, "Get out of the car." And we got out and the car's still going up and his kids are screaming in the back and he's laughing. And he's like, "Oh yeah, Sintra is just full of all these anomalies." And then, people have just gotten used to them for centuries. So do you think maybe it has to do with these ancient portals, perhaps?
I mean, I don't know. There's something, as I said, I think there's places of power.
Yeah, we
I'm
can.
not sure where these portals are, what that really means, but there's certainly strange places on Earth. I mean, we experienced this last time. We went there with a very good friend of mine and to a little village, and we were sort of laughing at things. We were sort of, kind of laughing at all the kooky people and the kooky assumptions and things of the like there's these like myths that you hear immediately. Okay, this is this and this is that. But then, the next day, one of these things did happen, or sort of, became just as we were sort of warned. So then we were like, okay, maybe we shouldn't, maybe we
Oh
shouldn't,
boy, watch your
yeah,
mouth.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, it is strange. Just when you think it's all folly, then something really strange happens. Even if you're not, a believer or anything, or inclined to be very open to these kinds of things, strange things do happen there. But again, also there is a huge element of just
Yeah,
hearsay and paranoia and cannabis induced, highfalutin ideas and things which have very little substance outside of being, fantasies, and people are claiming all kinds of things there. I think more than anywhere else in Europe that I've been. There's a lot of experts on what's happening there and who was part of what secret society and all this kind of stuff. So I mean, it's also, it's a kettle really, and you have to be a little careful with how you
yeah.
approach it, I think.
Yeah, we're back at the
And I mean,
trickster.
and there is like there are real esoteric groups
Yeah.
and people that are sort of struggling. There's like constantly some magical wars going on in these areas and between these different groups and
Oh.
villages. So so I've been told. So I mean, there is certainly something strange happening over there.
Oh, yeah, for sure, but like I
I
was
mean,
saying, we're back.
you've had Richard Stanley on, so I mean,
Yeah,
you can
he
say
lives there and he
yes.
guides and he does rituals, and I've heard from people without entheogens and all that, he can take you to altered states like that. And my friend Amanda Radcliffe lived there. So yeah, if I were to go, I would ask one of them, show me, separate the wheat from the chaff. Although, like you're saying, Aki, we're back at the trickster, right? On one hand, Hermes and Loki will give you pure bullshit. On the other hand, they will give you the gifts, the secrets of life. So you have to make the choice. And if you get burned, you get burned. If you get gnosis, you get gnosis, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just to give a balanced point of this, people should also check out the project called Perennial Pyrenees,
Mhm.
Martin Locker, and he also writes a lot about the sort of folklore and mythology and traditions, a little bit more from sort of academic perspective. And I think it's good to have these, you know, a balance of perspectives, to things. We certainly have a role and a part for visionaries and people who are sensitive to things, shall we say it? But we
Yeah.
also need, a clear-headed understanding of uh, the historical reality of things.
Yeah, I'd like to read an incident while you were there, if you don't mind, because I found it fascinating. You write, some acquaintance of mine who are not part of the New Age crowd have experienced remarkable things and even visions there, Languedoc. These experiences have not always been easy. A female friend who is initiated into traditional Finnish shamanism told me about her own tribulations. She often avoids, excuse me, studying the history of place she visits in order not to color her experience in advance. Smart. She knew nothing of the history of Montségur and happened upon this place only because her traveling companion insisted on visiting it. Up by the castle ruin, she started to experience flashes of what happened there in the past. She saw a secret room from which something had been taken away by a small group as they escaped down the mountain slope. She saw the men of the group hiding in the forest. But the truly disturbing part of my friend's experience came upon her while descending the mountains. She lost the strength in her legs as the visions were affecting her body in a sense of hearing. She was compelled to stop, sit down, and cry. She could hear the sound of women singing who were clearly in pain. Passerbys were baffled as she sat and wept on the path. That was very powerful because, like you said, she had no idea really what she was, right? And the history. You had to explain it to her, right? The burnings and the all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, this Montsegur, of course, is a site where the Cathars sort of came to an end, and where a large number of them were burned, and at the end of a 3 month, or was it half-year long siege of the mountain. And this was to that date, I believe, the biggest mass execution, mass burning of people. And so, yeah, it's a very, you know, this kind of historical event, of course, gives this place a sort of tragic aura. And there is something to that place. The places remember things.
Mhm.
And I don't know what it was, but even for me, going up there, I didn't really expect anything, but it was just very moving. I was just burst into tears coming into this place. It was just so, and I am not a very tearful person. I don't. It is not easy for me to become moved like that about things. So there's certainly something to that, and a lot of people have very strong experiences up there. Now, what is it? What is it that touches people? Is it the spirit of the people who used to be there? Some claim that they are, remnants of things. Who knows? But this was a holy site even before the Cathars. So these mountains and places like this that are high above everything else, and that have been holy sites for since as long as anybody can remember, there's certainly a reason why those places are like that. And I'm not sure what that reason is, but there's certainly some places that we can access or something can touch us more than average places do.
Very true. And as you write, even the Nazis were looking, snooping around in those areas with Otto Rahn and others, because the Holy Grail, they were looking, they knew where power was hiding, and they were looking for some of that sweet power, right? According to them. So, and the Romans had been there. So it was an amazing place. Did you see any interesting ideas on the Holy Grail, whether you're there or other places, or what was your take on this?
Well, I mean, Otto Rahn was, just to give a little context, Otto Rahn was a German sort of a researcher. He was not really a national socialist by heart. He
No.
was a young man, and he was given, a poor man, a poet, and he was a historical researcher, and he was given resources by the Nazis to be a part of the Ahnenerbe, which was the ancestral heritage and research department of the SS. And a young man given unlimited or very large resources to explore these subjects, the Cathars, the troubadours, the Grail, and go to these locations and look for relics and items and things like this. It's not a clean cut. It was the Nazis looking. It was, of course, specifically Heinrich
Himmler
Himmler, who
was
was
into that, yeah.
he was into these things, and he hired all these people to do this. Of course, there was a pressure on Otto Rahn, because he, you know, go find the Grail, and then you don't find the Grail, and then it's like, well, you should find something, perhaps. But yeah, so I mean, he did die in mysterious circumstances, as far as
Yeah.
we know. But anyway, yes, he did explore Montsegur, and he believed that the Montsegur was the Grail castle that is talked about in Wolfram von Essenbach's Parsifal. And
Mhm.
so these are the troubadour legends, and he relates them to the troubadour legends and things. Now, I don't know if you asked me, did I find the Grail?
No.
Or
If you're selling it for 19.99 online
exactly, yeah.
to get
Go
a
to my
copy.
website. Yeah, the, the, I mean, we can ask ourselves, what is the
What?
Grail?
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, we have the popular thing about it being the cup into which Jesus' blood was bled, but we also have legends of it being a stone or an emerald that fell from Lucifer's crown when he was cast out of heaven. We have the idea that it might be a book, or some sort of relic of power. Of course, I think the central idea is that the Grail is a symbol of union. It
Mhm.
is a vessel from which man drinks. So he becomes initiated. He gets a taste of the transcendent or the divine. It is the symbol of unity, of man becoming part or touching the stone, as in other legends. It's the stone that heals, lapsit exilis. So I think the Grail is a symbol, and perhaps the foremost European symbol of spiritual unity, because it is really this cultural thing that combines Christianity and paganism, because it contains layers of both, and it does represent this sort of ultimate treasure through which man can connect with the higher powers, or the divinities, or the divine. And I think it's really, really central, and why it's in this book. And really, this is the essence also of this chapter that deals with the various forms of the Grail search that has been going on for a long time and still goes on. And although the Grail isn't a tangible object, it can manifest, I think, in forms that we can sort of access, or we can get little uh, shreds or bits of it, in a way. So I do think that this is why this is so important.
I would agree with you. It is a powerful symbol for sure. And yes, we've got Aki Cederberg with us. I saw a super chat donation from Chester. Thank you very much, sir. Always appreciate. Yes, please support AM Biden any way you can. I could always use your hate. Well, I already get plenty of hate. I could always use your help. One-time donations, subscribe. We have low tiers, as low as $1 on Patreon. Keep in mind that I've just released all 3 Astronosis events, more than 30 hours of exclusive Gnostic content, all for one price. Again, in the show notes. Subscribe, share. Let's keep this Gnosis going so we can share with the world. This Gnostic Hermetic thought is more important than ever. The very existence of consciousness is at stake, as I always try to remind you, and we shall continue. But Graham, any question about the Cathars or the Grail that you have?
No, I've been very much fascinated with it. Just his take there and his experience in Languedoc. Never had the chance to be there myself. Always great to hear from people who have tagged.
Yeah, it's definitely on my goals next year. I want to get to. For some reason, I feel I need to go to southern France. So again, I'll have to reach out to Amanda and see what we can do so I can, because again, like you, Aki, people who go there just have amazing experiences. It's just incredible. Now
Yeah, and I
moving
mean
on.
they have
Go ahead.
these experiences despite of what they think or believe. I mean, there's something to that, So you don't have to have any preconceived notion of things, but there's certainly something there. And I don't know, it could be just, it is also a remote, extremely beautiful place. So, there is that.
Clean air. You get
Yeah.
clean air, which is so very rare in our industrialized society. And yeah, I think too, Aki, there must have been something going on around the 12th, 13th century in that area. I'm just going to say a UFO flew by because it's a good excuse, and but in that area, yeah, you had all this Gnostic resurgence. You had really the Kabbalists, as we know them, coming out, and they were very Gnostic at first, very dualist, very demiurge. You had the Cathars, troubadours. In the Middle East, you had the assassins and other Sufis coming out. In that area, going to the Mediterranean, into the Middle East, there was this resurgence of Gnostic esoteric thought. So, and it's almost no surprise, right, that the church, who really didn't have that much, most people think it had power. It really wasn't after they brought the hammer down on the Cathars that it became, the centralized church we know it as. They said, oh my God, this is getting out of hand. We need to exterminate all these groups and try to take control. So
Yeah, and they were very effective in doing so. And of course, this is the difficulty with things like the Cathars these days, because we really have a hard time knowing what they really thought and what they really did. I mean, it's highly speculative, because they were very thorough in their crusade and their genocide and their destruction of all existing relics and sort of proof of the thing. So it was sort of wiped out of existence, and they were very thorough. And of course, wiped out a lot of other things, wiped out a lot of paganism in the same,
right.
the same wave. So why I also think it's important to understand these things is, this is kind of like a situation where European Christianity and history went one way. This is it's a sort of a turning point that affected things a lot.
Yeah, very true indeed. As most people don't know, the Inquisition started with the Cathars. It was a very effective case study, and then it just got moved on to women, Jews, anybody who didn't toe the party line, and it helped centralize the church's power. And well, a lot was lost, if we are, and glad people are still looking at it. There's so little, but
Yeah, and
getting
this
better.
is like this is also one of those things. People have a tendency to project a lot of their ideologies into the past, And it doesn't
Yeah.
work like that. They just don't work in these narratives that we would like. We have these ideologies of today, and then we seek these, you know, we project these things into events of the past, and a kind of like an ideological framework. And okay, this is how this worked, and it doesn't. History is always more complex, I think, than that. For instance, the witch hunts or something like that. In Finland, they were mostly male, mostly men
Really?
that were, yes. It wasn't the feminist, the whole like patriarchy, coming down hard. It was mostly men who were witches and who were burnt, and you know so it doesn't always go according to these things that we would like. And I think one reason, of course, that people find Cathar so fascinating, and that whole thing, is because we don't know about them so much. We can think anything we want on them, and it's wonderful because there's going to be very few objections coming from their side.
Yeah, yeah, very true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to know your history. Even with the witches, when you look at records, the Catholic Church was actually not that bad towards witches. It's actually a lot smaller, a fraction than when people. The Protestants were really terrible against women and witches. The Inquisition after the Cathars was, if you went to accuse, usually if you said, "Oh, I'm sorry," the priest would say, "Oh, do 5 Hail Marys and don't do it again. Don't practice that paganism." And if you did that, yes, you were oppressed, but you didn't end up at the stake. And secular courts were far worse than the Inquisition, because then you were, the king could do whatever you wanted, or the prince of the region. So yeah, history is important, and it helps us take out our biases and not be so emotional. See that it's always complicated. It really, it's usually people trying to do the best they can with what they have, right? I mean,
Yeah,
the
and
so
then there's the aspect of course, of Catholicism, especially overtaking so many aspects of paganism.
of
I mean,
course.
why it became the religion of the people was because, for instance, the polytheism became substituted with the saints. I mean, that's a clear example. Or the holy days, they were overlaid as it happened on all the earlier holy days that were always celebrated since much earlier, such as Christmas, Easter, the spring celebrations, midsummer. All these things that are Christian celebrations have dates that go back to these earlier traditions. So this is how these things go.
Exactly. The church was very good with the marketing. It almost found a way to please everybody. So, but let's move on now to Portugal. Again, tell us about your visit to Quinta da Regalia, as you say, the most hermetic place in Europe. Tell us about that.
Well, Quinta da Regalera, I wanted to put this in there. This was written before I started writing this book. I mean, it takes place a decade earlier
Mm,
than the other events of this book. But I wanted to include it there because it is an example of this European tradition of Hermetic mystery gardens.
mhm,
And this is sort of the idea that you can create an earthly representation of divine paradise, that you can create a microcosm that represents the macrocosm. And these Hermetic mystery gardens, of which there exists, many throughout Europe. This is just one example that's quite contemporary. I mean, it doesn't go that far back, and it was made by a very wealthy person called Caravalho Monteiro, and a theater or opera set designer whose name escapes me right now. But so he designed this place with the help of this opera designer, opera set designer, and clearly there was a lot of esoteric, uh, Freemasonic, Rosicrucian, these kind of traditions were seeping into these plays. And the garden Quinta da Galera then became this sort of initiatory garden, a large area where the visitor can sort of experience um, the journey of initiation just by walking and exploring the garden. So it's sort of set in the physical landscape, and it really does represent this sort of idea, at least for me, of an earthly paradise in a way, and of initiation. Now, when this was founded, this was a private quinta is, it means a villa.
Right.
So this was a private space. It was clearly or probably used by some esoteric groups. We don't know for sure how it was used, but it was, certainly the experience was different back then, when the visitor who would be allowed to use this place or experience it in a certain specific way would be there and not have any preconceived ideas about what was going to happen, or what was going to, what he was going to discover, and so forth. Because it is quite strange. There's a cliff at the top of the property, which you push a wall, and then you come into a sort of inverted tower, and you go 9 stories through this inverted tower into the center of the earth, and then you wander in these dark passageways and so forth. I mean, there's different ways, of course, you can see. Should you go down there, or should you go through the caves and come up from this Poco Iniciado, this cave of initiation? That's the central sort of structure there. Well, be that as it may, nowadays it's of course a very heavily trafficked tourist site. I think it's become, if not the most visited place. So even the experience of the place that I write about 10 years ago, it's no longer quite accessible like that, just because of the heavy amount of visitors that it gets now every day. And it wasn't really built to house thousands of people every day. It was built for a few people, like not necessarily for a
Right.
general audience rush. So it's kind of like suffering from this over exposure in a way, but it still represents this idea of hermetic mystery gardens, how we can shape nature and the natural world into such a way that it represents the ideal, where man and nature and art and the gods all sort of meet in this harmonious manner. And I think it really comes down to our view of the world. Now, we were talking about Gnosticism and Catharism, which really view the material world in a very negative way. And I think this, in a way, doesn't. I mean, at least for me, I took from it that this creates a sort of illusion of the world is good, or fundamentally that we can shape the world into a place that resembles the paradise, or the idea of the beautiful. So, I mean, there's also, as we talk about all these things, there are these 2 strands in a way which run throughout Europe, which is the idea of, is the world, the material world, good, or is it not? And I mean, this is one of the central things. So I think in a way paganism, I mean, Nietzsche said that pagans are those who say yes to life, and this is a fundamentally sort of anti, I think, Buddhist kind of thought in a way, where you say yes to the tragedy also. It doesn't mean that it's all great, but you sort of say yes to all of it, despite the suffering and the pain and the inevitable tragedy that we as humans are gonna face, but we choose to still face it with a sense of heroism. I mean, that's a lot of what these ancient, foundational poems talk about. So that went into far corners of the thing now, but yeah. So this chapter really of the book deals with the idea of a paradise.
Yes, and did you isn't the view, well, it's all beautiful, but the Moorish castle view and going to the Moorish castle is just amazing. Talk about another wonderful culture. Yeah, they conquered half of Portugal, but God, they did the same. Just beauty and wonderful stuff.
Yes, I mean, a lot of one thing that also comes in this book, and which I certainly believe in, is that beauty is a manifestation of the divine, and beauty and the divine are sort of stand next to one another. And this is why I also deal with a lot of culture, in the book. I write a lot about artists creating shrines and temples and buildings and environments where we can sense the divine through beauty, and it's not accidental or merely subjective, but it does seem to have a sense of sort of a higher order.
Very true indeed. Yes, and I love Sintra. Again, my family lives 15 minutes away from there. I was there 2 years ago, and I swear every time I try to go to Sintra, something would happen. My son would get sick. We drive, and there'd be some destruction on. It was just something was keeping me away, so I have to get back. But even though I've been there hundreds of times at least. But yeah, it's a very mystical place. Again, Amanda Radcliffe has been there. Richard Stanley, when he did Color Out of Space, he did it there, and both the crew and them experience a lot of strange things, or
And Roman
otherworldly
and
things.
yeah, and
Yeah,
Roman Polanski, yeah, Roman
Ninth
Polanski's
Gate.
Ninth
Yeah,
Gate, yeah,
and
which is a great sort of movie about sort of these subjects also in its own way, because it's about the search and how this sort of unlikely seeker sort of slowly starts seeking for something else than material wealth or gain.
Very true. And Lord Byron lived there. Most people don't know that. You can walk by his apartment. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I didn't know either that Crowley was there. I guess the Portuguese don't mention that. And interesting, which is we were talking about that is, yeah, in Cascais by the ocean, there's Boca do Inferno, the mouth of hell, which is just huge cliffs. And in the winter, you get these 200 height waves. It's so dangerous. I mean, that's why people love to surf in Portugal. But you go there and it's gorgeous. I took my kids there, but I had no idea that that's where Crowley tried to fake his suicide, right?
Well, he succeeded.
He succeeded in
Yes, he
faking his
succeeded. I
suicide.
mean, he was traveling in Portugal with his then, lady. What was he calling these? The Scarlet Woman, and he was going to do some sort of ritual, but he fell out with the woman, and he became very annoyed at her, and he wanted to to take some sort of revenge on her, and so he planned this thing with Fernando Pessoa, the famous
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know he was
Portuguese.
friends with Pessoa, one of the greatest
Yes,
poets in history. Yeah.
yeah. And Fernando Pessoa translated Crowley's Hymn to Pan into
Mm,
Portuguese, and so they planned this thing together where Crowley left a suicide note at Boca di Inferno, these very dramatic cliffs at
yeah.
the coast of Cascais, and for the police to find. And Fernando Pessoa then sort of verified it or talked about it to the police or something like that. And just to annoy his woman apparently, and then in the meantime he left the country and had an art exhibition in London or something. So it was like, and there is a plaque on the coast at Boca di Inferno which commemorates this, so they do sort of acknowledge it there. I was very surprised to see that plaque on the stone there. So
How have I missed it for the last 50 years? That's hilarious. I'm gonna have to check it out. And yeah,
I mean,
Boca del
it could be
Inferno
new. It could be new.
could be, yeah, it could be some Thelemites putting it there, but still, yeah, and Boca del Inferno has not changed. I mean, there's no rails or very little. I mean, if you go down these cliffs, there's tourists in there, just one big wave, you're finished. So it would have been very believable for somebody like Crowley to accidentally fall in there and
Yeah, and
die.
of course it is a suicide spot.
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
also, why are certain places suicide spots? One can ask. They tend to, some places tend to become these places where people end their life, and this was one of them. And Crowley knew this, so this contributed to him, I think, choosing this location.
Yeah, it makes it makes perfect sense. So yeah, a lot of good stuff in your trip to Portugal, and I certainly am so glad to glad to learn about that. So as we get more or less to the end, you also wanted to talk about an article you wrote for Fenris, I believe, and this is about the byline is Faustian spirit. So maybe tell the audience about it. Very moving.
So if people want to know more about sort of Finnish history, I recommend the book Light Bringers of the North, I think it's called. Is it called that? Yes, Light Bringers of the North, which is about sort of the occult history of Finland. And one of the authors, Perttu Häkkinen, of the book, unfortunately died some years back, tragically. And yeah, this is really the first sort of English presentation of a sort of recent occult history of Finland, and it's published by Inner Traditions. And yeah, I wrote a tribute to him. He was a friend of mine, to the newest issue of the Fenris Wolf book anthology. I think it's issue 12. People can find that on Amazon probably easily. And yeah, it kind of deals with some of the topics that we've been talking about, like the Faustian soul, what really lies at the end of the quest. Why do so many people that go on magical journeys end up in tragic fates? I mean, there's no shortage of tragic
Really?
stories in Holy Europe either. Great seekers, and they don't find what they're seeking, but end up swallowed by the dragon that they went to slay, perhaps. So I think there's a lot of magical sort of dilemmas that maybe aren't questioned as often as they should in these circles. And so these are the kind of topics that I touch upon in this article. And of course, Perttu Häkkinen, he was a very famous person in Finland. He had his own radio show on national broadcasting, radio, so not like underground stuff, but really like a mainstream celebrity. And he went to the south of France as well, and he was, researching and going to do a documentary film about this, and he was thinking about getting a house over there. So he was a Grail seeker, and like so many others, he was allured by the Languedoc and pulled through it. And when you lose a peer, it gives you a chance to sort of reflect on the similarities and the differences that you might have had with this person, and your own path and your own journey and the dangers of it. And it's not these kind of journeys that we undertake. They're not without peril. They're not without risk. It says in Parsifal, who would seek the Grail, beware, because you might get lost in the mountain path, or something like that. And I think that's certainly good to keep in mind.
Yeah, very true, very true. And
But if
go
we
ahead.
don't, I mean, at the same time, sorry to keep going and interrupt you, but I think at the same time, certain people are supposed to be seeking and finding things, and if we don't risk getting lost, we will never find anything either, and we'll just remain lost. And I think our culture, European spiritual culture at this point, is standing at a precipice, and I think we are lost, and I think we are sort of forced to find something that will resurrect our spirit or bring back that soul that we have lost, because it's not looking good otherwise.
No,
And
not at
and I
all.
think it is fundamentally a spiritual problem, which then manifests in pragmatic ways and in the culture and in political terms and all these other ways. But I think it's an inner problem of European people, where they've lost something which they need to recover. And that's the whole sort of theme, this lost home of the book, Holy Europe.
Well said, and I agree with you 100%. Yeah, Europe is dying, and the United States and Canada are not too far ahead. And I keep saying, no, it's not a political, can't vote your way out. You can't think. It is spiritual, and you need to get reconnected with the land. And there is an American aura, and Neil Gaiman, well, who's persona non grata these days, but there are American gods, not as he wrote, but there is an essence to this land. And if we get into it, it will rejuvenate the psyche of North Americans. So it's the same thing in Europe. So I agree with you, and I keep glad you're banging the drum about it. I'll keep banging the drum about it, and hopefully some people will wake up. Would
Yeah,
you
and
go
who
ahead?
knows? I mean, how this is like a very serious topic, because who knows how this can happen or would happen. And I mean, I want to think that Europe is dying to be reborn. That there will be a sort of a death, or that we are witnessing a sort of death, but there can be a sunrise, and there can be a rebirth, and it has to be with something old taking on a new form. When I talk about paganism, I am not advocating a return to the exterior outer forms of paganism of a certain
No
era.
human sacrifice, huh?
Well, I mean, that might be a good idea, looking at some of the some of the our current leaders. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah. I
who
don't think
knows?
the
Maybe.
gods want them, Aki. They're like, ugh, no, keep them on
Yeah.
Earth.
Yeah, bring back the human sacrifice. No, well, I mean, the just the I would like to see a resurgence of the inner essence of paganism.
Mm.
The tree of life, and the world tree, it is an eternal tree. It grows within us, and we can regenerate it in the exterior world as well. But it doesn't have to take. I keep saying this because I want to emphasize that the paganism I'm advocating is not this dress up paganism where we imitate some other time into which we project our fantasies about, oh, it was good during the Viking times or something. This is not what I'm talking about. But that these wisdom traditions that we have in Europe, that they embody something very central and essential about the inner realities of the European peoples. And these inner realities are still there, and they're just waiting to be remanifested. And I think they need to be remanifested if our culture is going to survive.
Well said, and I would agree, and it needs to happen in other parts of the world before it's too late. Well, as we get to the end of this fantastic chat, do you have any last comment or question, Graham?
I do. It's one that I think it's a seed for another book or show that Aki can help me trying to fit within the European tradition, and that's Emanuel Swedenborg. I have trouble fitting him in with everything that Aki's doing. It's something I go back to and wrestle with every so often. But that's kind of maybe another show tag.
Yeah. Swedenborg, yeah, that's a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, I would say that's opening. And I'm not really an expert in Swedenborg, and there's certainly people who are more knowledgeable about these, late occult societies. And I think there's sort of happening this renaissance of occult research throughout the West. I mean, in Finland, there's a huge sort of flurry of books coming from academic researchers looking into for instance, the sort of cultural effects of Emanuel Swedenborg in Finland during, earlier
Mm.
times into artists and things. So, I mean, these are certainly figures and things to explore, but not he is not an subject which I am that familiar with to
Oh,
be
I
talking about it very, very much.
Oh, I agree. That's why I go back every so often. He doesn't fit into paganism, doesn't fit into any of the standard traditions. He's just sort of off on his own, and just he was so impressive in his own sense, and that's why I have trouble fitting him in with the whole rest of the sequence.
Yeah,
So
and he's
thanks.
underrated. He's very underrated still. He's a huge impact. I mean, we wouldn't have William Blake without Swedenborg, probably. So, yeah, well, yeah, so much to do, so little time. Well, we are at the end. Aki, I have your show notes, your website down in the show notes, but where do you want to send people to find out more about you and get Holy Europe, a book I highly recommend?
Yeah, the book is published by Arcana Europa, a great publisher, and it's available on Amazon everywhere. And yeah, I just recommend that people go read the book. I mean, I've put everything in there that I could, so it's quite a long book, and heavy in the sense of what all of the things that are in there. But I have included it for a reason, and I try to cover all these different disparate areas, because I think there is a red thread running through all of it. There is a cohesive story and thing I'm trying to find. So yeah, I recommend people go read it.
Awesome. I do too. And yes, it's a good read. And I see the thread. Of course, for me, it's going to be Hermes, but that's where I'm coming from. I always say this is the age of Hermes. If you're in a transition, if we're going through a doorway or portal, you need that Hermes with you, or the female version, Hecate, or the Indian version, Matangi. She's like the Hermes in India, and she's an awesome goddess to work with. But we are at the end. First of all, Graham, thanks for being the wingman here.
Oh, it's always a great time, and you've loved learning from Aki. Thank you so much.
Yes, Aki, thank you very much for coming on the show, and we look forward to your third book, or we look forward to having you on the show again.
Thank you so much to both of you. It was great. This was really, I think this was the first interview I did since the book has come out. So it was good to talk to you again, and thanks for your time and for reading.
Oh yeah, I enjoyed the read. And for the audience, thank you very much for coming here again on this Mercury day. I hope you learn a lot. The audio version will be out tomorrow, but it is now, of course, will be live on all the usual suspects, YouTube, Rockfin, Rumble, and all that. So we'll get to you again. Please support this show so we can continue spreading this gnosis, this heresy. And that's it. Everybody take care and have a good rest of your day. Write your own gospel, live your own myth. Bye.